What if the absolute most dangerous thing you could, possibly be is flawless?
Oh, that's a terrifying thought right out of the gate.
Right. But I want you to imagine, just for a second, being exactly 19 years old. Your life isn't just good, it is terrifyingly perfect.
Everything is just clicking into place.
Exactly. You have the total respect of your peers. Your career is taking off in a way most people only dream of. And you are literally waiting in the harbor to marry the absolute love of your life.
It's the peak of human happiness, which honestly, from a psychological standpoint, is an incredibly precarious place to stand.
Wait, really? Why is it precarious?
Well, because when every single variable in your life aligns perfectly, you tend to develop this profound blind spot. You assume the rest of the world is, operating on the same frequency of goodwill and merit that you are.
Ah, I see. You think everyone is playing by the same rules.
Precisely. And that assumption is exactly what makes the drop so agonizing.
Because in a single, inexplicable instant, that flawless future is violently ripped away. You aren't just demoted, you aren't just broken up with.
No, it's total destruction.
Right. On the very day you are meant to celebrate your engagement, you are dragged away by authorities, completely confused, and you're buried alive in a cold stone fortress surrounded by the ocean with absolutely no idea why.
You go from the pinnacle of hope to the darkest depths of, sensory and psychological deprivation overnight.
It's just insane to think about.
It is. The human brain cannot easily process a plunge like that. It literally lacks the cognitive framework to even categorize what is happening to it.
It is the ultimate nightmare. And that nightmare is the entire focus of our deep dive today. We've got an incredibly gripping excerpt in front of us titled The Architect of Retribution and the Soul's Final Escape.
Such a powerful title.
It really is. And our mission today is to look at this text and explore not just the mechanics of the ultimate story of betrayal and revenge, but the profound, altering psychological toll it takes on the human soul. Okay, let's unpack this.
To truly grasp the anatomy of the despair we're going to explore, we really have to look closely at the architecture of the life that was destroyed.
Right, the setup. So our text centers on a young sailor named Edmond Dantès.
The 19-year-old.
Yeah, exactly. And before the fall, his life in Marseille is simple, it's joyful, and incredibly successful. He has already proven himself as a highly skilled sailor.
His captain trusts him implicitly, right?
Implicitly. The ship's owners respect him enough to prepare him for a captaincy. And waiting for him on shore is Mercedes, the woman he loves, who he is just about to marry.
What's fascinating here is the tragedy of Edmond's complete innocence. The text explicitly notes that his bright future was exactly the problem.
His success made him a target.
Exactly. We often think of success as a shield. But when you are that young and your trajectory is that steep, success actually acts as a beacon. It highlights you to people who are operating from a place of deficit.
And that brings us to the three men watching from the shadows. Because while Edmond is just happily living his life, there is this toxic brew of envy quietly bubbling around him.
Bubbling right under the surface.
Yeah. The text breaks down their motives into three distinct, highly destructive vectors of human malice. One man envies Edmond's fast-track promotion to captain.
Professional inadequacy.
Right. Another man is consumed by romantic jealousy, wanting Mercedes for himself. And the third man fears that a political letter Edmond is innocently carrying might expose dangerous secrets.
So we are looking at professional inadequacy, romantic entitlement, and political paranoia.
Any one of those is bad news.
Oh, absolutely. Any one of those is dangerous on its own. But when they synchronize, they create a catastrophic threat. Edmond's fundamental flaw wasn't arrogance. It was an underdeveloped psychological immune system.
I love that phrasing, psychological immune system.
Yeah, he had only ever lived in a sunny meritocratic environment, so he had built zero defenses against other people's toxicity.
It makes me think, I look at Edmond's early life like a magnificent skyscraper built entirely without wind bracing.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
He put every steel beam exactly where it belonged to support his own weight, but he never accounted for external pressure. So when these three men orchestrate their conspiracy, accusing him of being a treasonous political operative, it's not a fair fight.
Not at all.
They just hit this unbraced structure from three different angles with a massive gust of wind, and the entire life he built simply collapses into dust.
He didn't even have the cynical vocabulary to recognize he was under attack until it was far too late. He believed so deeply in the fairness of the system that he assumed his innocence would naturally protect him.
Which makes his literal entombment that much more horrific. I mean, he is denied a fair trial and secretly vanished to the Château d'If.
Truly terrifying place.
Yeah, the text describes this place as a fortress prison built on a jagged little rock in the Mediterranean Sea. The waves crashing against the stones sound like freedom, but they might as well be on another planet.
There's no way out.
None. This isn't a rehabilitation center. This is a place engineered to make men disappear.
It is an environment designed for total isolation. And we really need to understand the physiological reality of that. The human brain is essentially a sophisticated prediction machine.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, it requires constant external input friction, conversation, changing environments, just to maintain its structural integrity. When you strip all of that away and plunge a person into a dark, silent stone box, the brain begins to starve.
Wow. And the text mentions that prisoners in the Château d'If routinely lost their sanity long before their bodies gave out.
Because the mind just turns on itself.
Exactly. Edmond is just sitting there in the dark. Days bleed into months, months into years. He starts out believing a mistake was made, waiting for a pardon.
That false hope is brutal.
It is. But the text provides this visceral description of hope literally rotting away. His mind is starting to fragment.
Because without external data to process, the mind will start generating its own fragmented reality just to stay active. Edmond is teetering on the absolute edge of severe psychological collapse. He is seconds away from losing his mind completely.
But just as he is about to break, a catalyst introduces itself. Out of nowhere, from behind the thick stone wall of his cell, he hears a rhythmic scratching sound.
The first piece of new external data his brain has received in years.
Right. And it turns out to be another prisoner attempting to dig a tunnel, an elderly priest named Abbé Faria.
Faria is such a crucial character.
He really is. He isn't just another lost soul. He is described as brilliant, limitlessly patient, and basically a walking encyclopedia. In the pitch black of this dungeon, this priest becomes Edmond's lifeline.
He gives him a reason to live.
He teaches him multiple languages, hard sciences, philosophy, the complex mechanics of society, everything.
We have to view this not just as a school, but as a critical neurological intervention.
The neurological intervention.
Yes. Faria didn't just give Edmond something to do, he provided complex cognitive scaffolding. By forcing Edmond to memorize languages and scientific principles in the dark, Faria essentially rewired Edmond's decaying brain, giving it a rigid structure to cling to.
That makes so much sense. And the most crucial piece of that scaffolding is the truth. Faria listens to Edmond's story and finally helps him understand the conspiracy that destroyed his life.
He connects all the dots for him.
He identifies the professional envy, the romantic jealousy, the political paranoia. He gives Edmond the names of his destroyers. And as if that wasn't enough, before Faria dies, he reveals the location of a staggering secret treasure hidden on the uninhabited island of Monte Cristo.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see a profound transition. Faria provides the two most dangerous things you can hand to a deeply traumatized person.
Which are?
Absolute clarity about who hurt them and the infinite resources to do something about it.
Okay, wait, I have to push back a little on this narrative of Faria as the ultimate savior.
Oh.
We read this and think, thank goodness Faria saved him from despair. But was this gift actually a curse? Think about the timeline. Before Faria, Edmond was agonizingly sad, yes, but he was still, at his core, an innocent sailor hoping for justice from the universe.
That's true. He was still naive.
By handing him the complete blueprint of his betrayal, the names, the motives, the mechanics of how he was ruined, did Faria essentially murder the innocent 19-year-old? Did he replace passive, harmless despair with a highly calibrated, incredibly dangerous weapon?
That is the pivotal psychological pivot of the entire narrative.
Yeah.
You cannot survive an environment like the Château d'If as an innocent.
So the innocents had to die.
The 19-year-old had to die for the organism to survive. Faria's education stripped away the very last illusion of a fair and just world. He transitioned Edmond from a passive victim waiting for rescue into an active, calculating strategist.
He realized he was just a piece on the board.
Exactly. The knowledge didn't just solve a mystery, it fundamentally altered his identity. He realized he was merely a pawn on someone else's board, and he decided to learn how to be the player.
He had to become hardened to survive the reality of his own life. And that internal hardening leads to the physical metamorphosis. Faria passes away, and Edmond executes a terrifyingly desperate escape.
The bag in the ocean.
Yes. He is thrown into the freezing sea, leaving the stone prison behind, and the text emphasizes that the frightened, hopeful sailor who entered that fortress was gone forever. The entity that pulls itself out of the Mediterranean is entirely new. the Count of Monte Cristo.
The cold water of the sea acts as a baptism into this new, hardened identity. He sheds the victimhood completely.
And with Faria's secret treasure now secured, he returns to the world. But he doesn't burst through the doors demanding his old life back.
No, he's much smarter than that.
Right, he doesn't challenge his betrayers to a loud, chaotic duel in the streets. He returns disguised as a mysterious, enigmatic nobleman with bottomless wealth. And honestly, far more terrifying than his wealth is his endless patience.
Patience is the defining characteristic that separates a crime of passion from a masterclass in retribution.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We typically envision revenge as a fiery, immediate explosion. But the text describes the Count's vengeance as a slow-gathering storm at sea. It doesn't strike all at once.
It's methodical.
Very.
Yeah.
I want to move away from the usual ideas of a chess game and compare his plot to a highly sophisticated controlled demolition.
I like that.
When you want to bring down a massive skyscraper, you don't just hit it with a wrecking ball. You spend months inside the structure. You map out the load-bearing pillars. In the case of his enemies, their finances, their reputations, their families.
You find the weak spots.
Exactly. You quietly wire the explosives into the very foundation of their lives over a period of years. And then you walk away to a safe distance and you simply press a detonator.
I want to pose this directly to the listener. What stands out to you when you consider that level of restraint? Most human beings have an overwhelming biological drive for immediate catharsis.
We want instant gratification.
Exactly. If someone deeply wrongs us, the instinct is to lash out right then and there to balance the scales, to hold on to a burning, life-destroying grievance for well over a decade, allowing it to simmer and crystallize without ever breaking character.
It's almost inhuman.
It requires a terrifying suppression of the ego. The Count denies himself the immediate satisfaction of screaming, "It's me, Edmond!" because he knows that true retribution requires the victims to actively participate in their own downfall.
Yes. He weaponizes their own fatal flaws against them. He uses the banker's greed to ruin him financially. He uses the politician's paranoia to destroy his reputation.
He doesn't even have to get his hands dirty.
He just sets up the dominoes and lets their own corrupt natures do the pushing. It is breathtakingly cold.
He has taken the vast intellect, the sociology, the philosophy that Faria poured into him in that dark cell, and he has synthesized it into a weapon of mass destruction aimed precisely at three people.
It's targeted annihilation.
He isn't just taking their lives. He is methodically dismantling their reality.
But, and this is the big but, there is a fatal flaw in spending 20 years building a machine designed entirely to destroy other people. What happens when the machine finally runs out of targets?
The aftermath.
The text forces us to look at the fallout, the aftermath of getting precisely what you plotted to achieve. The Count watches the dust settle. The men who stole his youth, his freedom, and his fiancée are utterly ruined.
The controlled demolition was a spectacular success.
It was. But a deeply troubling void opens up in his heart. The text states that revenge had given him power, and it had delivered a ruthless form of justice, but it had not given him an ounce of peace.
Which introduces the concept of the sunk cost fallacy applied to human trauma.
The sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah. We harbor this illusion that if we inflict enough proportional pain on the people who hurt us, the universe will somehow issue us a refund for the time we lost.
So what does this all mean? If Edmond spends the entire second act of his life systematically eradicating the men who wronged him, but he still wakes up feeling hollow, did the three betrayers actually win?
That is a dark thought.
But think about the math here. They lost their wealth and their status, sure. But didn't they successfully dictate the entire trajectory of Edmond's life? By forcing him to spend decades consumed by anger, didn't they essentially drag him down to their level, turning him into a dark, calculating predator?
This raises an important question about the fundamental divergence between justice and peace. We use those words interchangeably in our culture, but they're entirely different mechanisms. Well, justice is an external balancing of the scales. Peace is an internal state of being. The text forces us to confront an incredibly uncomfortable reality. Surviving the physical confines of a prison is a completely separate ordeal from surviving the psychological prison constructed by severe trauma and the obsession with vengeance.
Man, he swam away from the island of the Château. He physically escaped, but the betrayal built a brand new cell around his mind.
A mental prison.
A cell constructed out of hypervigilance, resentment, and relentless calculation.
And the tragic irony is that by becoming the brilliant architect of their retribution, He became the warden of his own new prison.
Wow. Warden of his own prison.
Because when you dedicate every neural pathway in your brain to destruction for that many years, your brain literally prunes away the capacity for joy, for relaxation, for innocent connection. You don't get to press a button and revert to being a happy 19-year-old sailor just because your enemies are dead.
The greatest prison Edmond Dantès escaped was not the stone fortress on the island. It was the darkness inside his own soul. That is the final line of our excerpt, and it frames the entire journey perfectly.
It really captures the tragedy of it all.
He spent his youth digging his way out of a literal dungeon with a spoon, only to spend his adulthood trapped in a psychological dungeon he built himself with limitless wealth.
He leveraged the treasure of Monte Cristo to buy the world, but he found out you cannot buy back the lightness of sitting in a harbor believing the universe is inherently good.
You just can't get it back.
No. Once that innocence is shattered, revenge does not glue the pieces back together. It just grinds them into a finer dust.
It is such a profound, heavy exploration of what happens to a human being when they are pushed past the breaking point. We started our dive with a joyful, flawless young man, completely unaware of the resentment his success was generating. We followed him down into the absolute sensory void of solitary confinement, where his mind began to eat itself, until an elderly priest provided the cognitive scaffolding of education and the dangerous clarity of truth.
The transition.
We watched him transform in the freezing ocean into a man capable of engineering a decades-long controlled demolition of his enemies. And finally, we arrived at the sobering realization that weaponizing your trauma might balance the scales, but it leaves you standing in the rubble of your own life.
It forces us to examine the real cost of carrying our deepest injuries. Which leaves me with a final thought I want you, the listener, to mull over today.
All right, let's hear it.
Think back to that terrifying silent stone cell. If Edmond Dantès had never heard that rhythmic scratching in the wall, if he had never met Abbé Faria, never received that education, and never learned the terrible, undeniable truth of his betrayal, would his mind have eventually snapped, allowing his soul to find some kind of quiet, delusional peace in the darkness? Or is the agonizing, all-consuming pursuit of justice simply an inescapable human instinct, demanding a reckoning no matter how completely it destroys us in the process?
That is a deeply haunting question to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the stories you encounter. Keep looking closely at the mechanisms behind human behavior. And remember that sometimes the most difficult cages to escape are the ones we meticulously design for ourselves. Until next time.